Imagine finding a ring that could make you completely invisible. No consequences, no witnesses, total freedom to do whatever you want. What would you do with it? Before Lord of the Rings, before any modern story about corrupting power, there was an ancient tale that asked this exact question. A story so powerful that philosophers have debated it even since it was told by history's most famous philosopher. The movie Lord of the Rings made this type of story famous, but this version is much older. This is the original, and it predates its successors by centuries. The original story is Greek and has a famous legend behind it, the legend of the Ring of Gyges. We're going to tell you the legend, and by the end of this video you'll learn why this story is more relevant today than ever before, and how you can use it to train yourself to overcome your own weaknesses. But first, the story. It comes to us from Plato. Academics think it originated from legends current in Greece at the time. Some people even think that, due to similarities with folklore about mountains and dwarves and treasure from around the world, it may have been built around the seed of the experience of someone who really did find something mysterious in the ancient world. But before we continue this story, I need to warn you, what happens next might change how you think about yourself. Because this isn't just a story about a magic ring, it's about you, me, and every person who's ever been tempted by power. The story of the Ring of Gyges goes like this. In ancient Greece, there lived a shepherd, a humble man scraping out a living outdoors. One day, as he was making his rounds, walking across the mountainside with his sheep, the ground started to shake. It was an earthquake, and it hit like a bomb. The shepherd fell down, and the sheep scattered. The earthquake shook everything and then stopped. When it was over, the shepherd got up and found he was unhurt. He looked around to find his sheep, and noticed something. A hole had opened up in the size of the mountain, a crack in the rock. It was big enough for him to fit through. He was curious. What was on the inside of this mountain he climbed over every day with his sheep? So the shepherd hunched over and squeezed his body through the crack. When he got to the other side, he was shocked. He was inside a tomb. In the center, there was a sculpture of a large bronze horse, but the horse was huge, much larger than anything that would fit a human. After taking a moment to collect his breath, and make sure no one else was around, the shepherd approached the metal horse. It didn't move, so he climbed up the side of the horse and peeked inside. What he saw inside shocked him. He was staring at the body of a skeletal giant, the dead body of a warrior. On one hand, it sported a ring. That caught his eye. Holding his breath, he reached out to touch the body. He could feel the ring. He could even move it. This was a man who'd spent his life slaving away for sheep, and now he'd found something worth more coins than he would earn in a decade. He pulled the ring off, held up his hand and slipped the ring on. And in that moment, from one second to the next, his body went from being visible to gone. He knew he was there, he was looking right where his arm should be, but his body and everything that he knew was there could not be seen. This was no ordinary ring. This magical ring was the Ring of Gyges. Ultimately, it tells us about ourselves. What happened next? Plato tells us that the next part of the story is a horror story. The shepherd, Gyges, became a murderer. Gyges probably started off slow, going to places with other people like the town market, noticing that no one could see him. Then, he gets an idea. He uses the power of invisibility to sneak into the king's palace. He finds the queen. This invisible man convinces her that he doesn't want to harm her. He wants to do a deal. Gyges convinces her that with his magical power, they could be unstoppable. He's broken into the palace after all, and she can see that he's made himself invisible. Together they come up with a plan to kill the king. He commits a terrible crime. He kills the king. He uses the ring's power to remain invisible and assassinate him. Then, with the queen's help, he takes over the throne and becomes the king himself. All because of one magical ring that brought ruin to the kingdom in which it was found. Glaucon tells this tale in Plato's The Republic to argue that people only act justly because they have to. He thinks that, if people were given the power to act unjustly without consequences, anyone would choose to act unjustly for profit. Why does Plato include this story? Because he wants us to think about the nature of morality. He's interested in what we would do if we came into a lot of power. Would we be good people? We can think for ourselves and decide what is right. But what would we do? For us as Stoics, we have our answer. A life well lived is what we want to achieve. The Ring of Gyges story is a challenge that Socrates spends the Republic addressing, with a theory of justice. For Socrates, justice is a virtue of the soul, rather than as a social contract we follow to avoid punishment. We can learn from him, and from the wisdom of the ages we still have today. So what would a Stoic do with the Ring of Gyges? The answer lies in understanding what real power is. Real power comes not from controlling others, but from mastering ourselves. A Stoic would recognize that the ring's power of invisibility is, in fact, an ultimate test of character. It's easy to act virtuously when others are watching, when social pressure and consequences keep us in check. But what about when no one can see us? What about when we could do anything we want without getting caught? This is where the real essence of Stoic philosophy shines through. A Stoic understands that what matters isn't what others can see, but what we do. The ring doesn't just make us invisible to others, it makes our true character visible to ourselves. Gyges used his newfound power for personal gain, for violence, for taking what wasn't his. But did this make him happy? Did it bring him peace? In the long run, as Stoicism teaches, that is not the way to happiness. The story doesn't tell us about Gyges' later life, but we can imagine the cost of living with this blood guilt. Every time he sat on his stolen throne, every time he wore his crown, he would know the truth. He wasn't really a king. He was a murderer who got lucky, and if his queen betrayed him, wouldn't he deserve it? There can be no rest and no peace when you choose the life of a villain. A Stoic would approach the ring's power differently. He would ask, how can I maintain my integrity, even when no one would know if I didn't? How can I use my power to help others even if no one sees it? What is the true test here? The power of the ring, or my response to that power? We all face Ring of Gyges moments in our lives, times when we could get away with something because no one would know. Maybe it's taking credit for someone else's work when they're not around to speak up. Maybe it's keeping quiet when we know something wrong is happening. Maybe it's the temptation to abuse power or authority when we think no one will punish us. The ring represents any situation where we have power without accountability. And in our modern world, these situations are everywhere. There are so many situations where people are figuratively invisible. On the internet behind a username, in a company behind closed doors, in private moments when we could choose to help or ignore someone in need, and in the small daily choices we make when no one is looking. So how do we prepare ourselves for these moments? How do we build the strength to choose right even when we could temporarily get away with doing something wrong? The Stoics would suggest rehearsal. Just as we're doing now with the Ring of Gyges story, we can rehearse our response to power. We can ask ourselves, what would I do if I found this ring? What would my first thought be? My second, what would I do in the first hour, the first day? By thinking through these scenarios now, we build the mental muscles we need for when real test comes. Because it will come, maybe not in the form of a magic ring, but in the form of opportunities to abuse power, to take advantage, to act without immediate consequences. The real power isn't in being able to do whatever we want, without getting caught. The real power is in being able to do the right thing even when we could get away with doing the wrong thing. This is what it means to live a life well lived. This is what it means to be truly free. You can never be free of consequences, but we can be free of the need to hide who we really are and what we've done. So next time you face your own Ring of Gyges moment, remember, the true test isn't what you could do with the power you're given. The true test is what you choose to do with it. And that choice, that moment of decision, is where your real character becomes visible, even if you yourself are not. But there's another level to the ring story, an even deeper one. The ring doesn't just grant power, it reveals desire. Before Gyges ever put on the ring, before he knew it would make him invisible, he was already reaching for it. He was already imagining how it would change his life. Think about that moment. A shepherd, living a simple life, suddenly confronted with something valuable, something that could lift him out of his hard existence. The temptation began before the power did. This reveals something crucial about how we handle unexpected opportunities. Often, our moral compass starts spinning before we even encounter the real test. We begin justifying, rationalizing, imagining what we deserve long before we're actually faced with a choice. The Stoics understood this. They knew that the most dangerous moment isn't when we're faced with temptation, it's in the quiet moments before, when we're alone with our thoughts, rehearsing our justifications, telling ourselves stories about what we're owed. This is why Stoic practice emphasizes morning meditation, that quiet time when we prepare ourselves for the day ahead, because by the time the test comes, it's often too late to start building our defenses. Here's another aspect worth considering. Gyges didn't earn the ring, he found it. Like many windfalls in life, inheritances, lucky breaks, privileged positions, the power came to him by chance, not merit. This raises an interesting question. Do we have a greater moral obligation when we receive power we haven't earned? The Stoics would argue yes. When fortune favors us, it creates a debt, not to fortune, but to virtue. The more we receive by chance, the more we owe to wisdom. Consider how different the story might have been if Gyges had spent years studying the arts of invisibility, training his mind and spirit, preparing himself for the responsibility of such power. But he didn't. Like many who suddenly come into power, he was unprepared for its weight. There's an irony in the Ring of Gyges story that's built into it. In becoming invisible to others, Gyges became more visible to himself. Every action he took, every choice he made, was witnessed by the one audience he couldn't escape, his consciousness. This speaks to a fundamental truth about ethical behavior. The most important witness to our actions isn't society or other people, it's ourselves. We can hide from everyone else, but we can't hide from the knowledge of what we've done, and what we've done will eventually matter. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journals, wasn't concerned with what others thought of him. He was concerned with living up to his own standards, even in moments when no one else would know. When Gyges discovered the ring of invisibility in that ancient tomb, he stood at a crossroads. While history tells us of the dark path he chose, let us imagine how differently his story might have unfolded had he embraced Stoic principles. This is the tale of another possible Gyges, one who understood that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. In those first moments after slipping on the ring, when his body vanished from sight, this Gyges felt the same rush of possibility, the same intoxicating sense of possibility. But where the Gyges we know immediately thought of personal gain, our Stoic Gyges paused to reflect, remembering the wisdom passed down by philosophers, that virtue is the only true good, and that justice must be practiced not for its rewards, but for its own sake. His first action upon discovering his newfound power was not to scheme or plot, but to sit in quiet contemplation on the mountainside where he tended his sheep. He considered the words that would later be echoed by Marcus Aurelius: "Focus on doing the right thing, the rest doesn't matter." The ring had given him power without accountability, but he understood that the greatest accountability comes from within. As a shepherd, Gyges knew his community. He knew which families struggled to feed their children, which elderly citizens needed care, and which merchants dealt dishonestly with their customers. With his power of invisibility, he could observe and understand these problems even more deeply, becoming a silent guardian of justice rather than its subverter. He began small, true to the Stoic principle of practical wisdom. During market days, he would invisibly observe merchants who were known to cheat their customers with false weights and measures. Rather than using this information for blackmail or personal gain, he would leave anonymous notes for the authorities, giving evidence of fraud and protecting the community's most vulnerable members. When bandits plagued the mountain passes, Gyges used his invisibility to follow their movements, marking their hideouts with signs that would lead the city's guards to them. In times of drought, Gyges would guide lost sheep back to their rightful owners, leaving no trace of his intervention. When he discovered that the local grain merchant was hoarding food during a shortage, he didn't steal the grain, but rather used his invisible presence to document the hoarding and ensure the authorities could address it justly. But perhaps his greatest test came when he learned of a plot against the king, the same situation that, in the original tale, led to the king's murder. Instead of joining the conspirators or using the information for personal gain, our Stoic Gyges found ways to anonymously warn the king's loyal advisors, preventing bloodshed without seeking reward. The ring gave him the power to take anything he wanted, but this Gyges understood Seneca's wisdom that the greatest wealth lies in limiting our desires rather than expanding our possessions. He continued to live simply, using his powers not to accumulate wealth but to ensure justice and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Some nights, sitting alone in his humble shepherd's hut, Gyges would remove the ring and look at it, remembering Epictetus's words: "Freedom is not procured by a full enjoyment of what is desired, but by controlling desire." The ring had given him the freedom to act without consequence, but he had found a greater freedom, the ability to act with virtue regardless of whether anyone would know. Years passed, and while the Gyges of history became a king through murder and deceit, our Stoic Gyges remained a shepherd, though one who had transformed his community in countless small, unseen ways. He never sought credit for his good deeds, embodying Marcus Aurelius's teaching that virtue needs no audience. When travelers passed through his village, they would remark on how unusually peaceful and prosperous it seemed, how the poor were cared for, how justice prevailed in its markets and courts. None knew that their good fortune stemmed from a humble shepherd who had chosen to use great power with great responsibility. As he grew older, Gyges began to understand that the ring's true value lay not in its power to make him invisible, but in how it had made his character visible to himself. Every choice to use his power for good rather than personal gain had strengthened his commitment to virtue, proving Socrates' truth that justice is valuable for its own sake, not merely for its consequences. This imagined tale of Gyges shows us that power, even absolute power, doesn't have to corrupt absolutely. When guided by Stoic principles, justice, self-control, wisdom, and courage, even the most extraordinary abilities can become tools for positive change, rather than instruments of destruction. The choice always lies not in what we can do, but in who we choose to be. Today, we have our societal versions of a device that turns us invisible. Thanks to technology and the society's development, we have anonymity at scale. The internet, corporate structures, complex financial systems, all these create opportunities to act without direct accountability. But here's where we can learn from the Ring of Gyges. The real danger isn't in having power without accountability. The real danger is in believing that accountability only comes from others. Consider these scenarios. What would you do when you find a flaw in a system that could be exploited? What would you do when you can cut corners in a way that could be dangerous but would never be detected? Each of these is a Ring of Gyges moment. Each is a test, not of our fear of consequences, but of our understanding of what truly matters. So how do we prepare for these moments? How do we build the strength to remain ethical even when we could get away with being otherwise? Here are some practical exercises. 1. The daily review. Start each day by asking, what situations might I face today where I could choose between right and easy? Then, at day's end, review your choices. Be your own witness. 2. The power audit. Regularly assess the powers you already have. Your knowledge, your position, your power. How are you using them? How could you use them better? The invisibility test. Before making any decision, ask yourself, would I make the same choice if everyone could see me, if no one could see me? The answer should be the same. The legacy question. Consider not just what you could do with power, but what story you're writing about yourself. What tale will your choices tell? Finally, consider doing this challenge this week. Notice your invisible moments. Those times when you could cut corners, take advantage, or act selfishly without anyone knowing. Keep track of these moments by writing them down. What did you choose? How did it feel? How in line are they with these Stoic principles? Keep it up, and you can transform how you think about power and choice in your own life. The Ring of Gyges isn't just a story about power, it's a story about choice, and every day, in ways large and small, we make choices about how to use whatever power we have. Remember, true power isn't in controlling others or evading consequences. True power is in controlling ourselves, in choosing right over easy, in being able to look at ourselves in the mirror and know that we've lived up to our own standards. The next time you face a moment of unseen power, remember Gyges. He chose poorly. You can do better. Remember that the real test isn't what you could do with power. The real test is who you choose to be when you have it. Finally, if you found value in this video, please give it a like. It really helps us out and keeps this channel going. It makes a world of difference and we'd greatly appreciate it. If you want to share your thoughts, leave a comment. And of course, we'd love it if you subscribed. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.